Assalamualaikum. My name is Azman Muhammad Farouk and I am part-time master student in computer science. This semester, I am taking reading in computer science that require me to come out one conference or journal paper from my research. My lecturer for this subject is Dr. Afiza Ismail and my supervisor is Dr. Alisman. My research topic is Best Practices Restful API with Token-Based User Authentication using PHP Framework. My presentation divides into 4 parts, that is introduction, problem statement, evaluation method, and result and conclusion. For introduction, I have 5 components here. Number 1 is about PHP. 2. What is PHP framework? 3. About RESTful API. 4. Token-based authentication. And last but not least, JSON Web Token. PHP is a recursive acronym for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. PHP was created by Rasmus Lerdof in 1994, object-oriented and server-side scripting language that is used with conjunction with HTML. PHP is one of the most popular languages that is used in web application development. The reason PHP became popular is because its characteristics that are dynamic, flexibility, easy to use, and easy to learn. Other than that, PHP also famous as compile fast, cross-platform, open source, and require minimal setup. Now, the problem is, in classic PHP, programmers develop web application by putting all together data access, business logic, and presentation layer in a single page. This situation becomes a problem when programmers working with large development of web application. The situation becomes worse when a lot of code repetition is done in development. Programmers will have trouble finding bugs when errors occur. Maintenance phase become very challenging and difficult to expand the web application in the future. To solve the problem, PHP framework was introduced. PHP framework start using architectural pattern to organize logic, data, and presentation layer as separate files, but produce the same result. Some built-in function, libraries, extension, and helper that make development smooth, faster, and easier. Other advantages using PHP framework are standard and consistency of code design and structure, remove repetitive code, and promote reusable class and function. Less code to write, follow good coding practice, increase application security, easy for interoperability, and easy to maintain. But that is another problem. Choosing the best PHP framework is still an issue to programmers and system analysts. This is because not all PHP frameworks meet the same need and not all frameworks cover all aspects of web application. A RESTful application programming interface, known as REST API, is an application programming interface suitable for use in REST architectural style to enable interaction with RESTful web services. REST was created in 2000 by computer scientist Roy Fielding and stands for Representational State Transfer. At that time, Fielding used REST to design HTTP 1.1 and Uniform Resource Identifier. REST used existing application layer protocol, Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP functionality. API consists of set of definition and protocol to implement, integrate, and exchange data in application software. API also has a standard between the client and information provider that need to follow and fulfill by both parties. For example, the API structure for map service need the user to supply location name and send the request to API provider, and provider reply the request with information need by the user. In other words, API help to providing interoperability with a system and fulfill the request to retrieve information, perform a task or function, or to store a data. When a user made a request in a RESTful API, it sends a representation of the state of the resource to the provider or endpoint. This representation has several formats such as JavaScript Object Notation or JSON, XLT, HTML, Python, PHP, or plain text. Now, let's see what is token-based authentication. Token-based authentication is one of the methods used in web authentication to produce a more secure verification process. There are three authentication categories. That is something you know, knowledge, something you are, inheritance, and something you own, possession. Token-based is categorized as possession category because the user need to get the token generated by the server before being given access to other resources. Usually, token authentication is used with password authentication to improve the level of security, where the user need to enter the password first before given a token generated by the server. This method known as two-factor authentication. After obtaining the token, user can using token with the specific time period. The token provided also has other information that allow the server or endpoint to recognize the owner that sent the request and the access level given to the user. JSON Web Token or JWT is an open standard that uses the token-based method in its operation. JWT has designed a method that allows a compact and self-contained way for securely transmitting data between parties using JSON format. JWT is a web token to represent a claim to be transferred between the two parties and encoded as a JSON object that is digitally signed using a JSON web signature. JWT documentation explains that the data can be signed using two methods, which is signed using a secret or a public-private key pair using RSA or ECDSA. JWT are encrypted to hide information between two parties. Although JWT encrypt, the process still focuses on signed token. When tokens are signed using public-private key, the signed signature also confirms that only the party holding the private key signed it. JSON Web Token is ideal to use with RESTful API due to the following requirement and reason. First, authorization. RESTful API requires an authorization method that allows users to log in only once and is given a JWT token for subsequent access or request. The token has that allow the server to identify the owner or user who sent the request and only allow access to the resource that are permitted with that token. Second, information exchange. The basic of RESTful API is to enable user to exchange data from or to the endpoint. JSON Web Token is a method that allows data to be sent securely. JWT has a signature using the public-private key, and the recipient can ensure that the data received is from the correct sender. The signature is calculated using the header and the payload. You can also verify the content hasn't been tampered. Let's move to problem statement. Based on all these elements and requirements that I mentioned in the introduction part, 3 PHP frameworks with the highest usage rating on Google Trends 2019 were selected to determine the best framework. The frameworks are Laravel, Symfony, and CodeIgniter. For that purpose, this study conducted an experiment to compare performance on 3 selected frameworks. This study also evaluates some other criteria that are required to create the best practice RESTful API to facilitate the choice between these three frameworks. The outcome of this study is to help programmers and system analysts to choose the right PHP framework that have been performed to develop RESTful API and have capability to support token-based user authentication. Next, evaluation method that I use in this study. There are two methods of evaluation to be made. The first one is content analysis by using QSOS method. QSOS is a free software evaluation method designed by Authos Origin, propose a method designed to qualify, select, and compare open source solutions in an objective, traceable, and argue way. QSOS aims to compare, evaluate, and select software in a reasoned manner and adapt to the specific context of use. Content analysis is a research tool used to determine the presence of certain words, themes, or concepts within some given qualitative data. The data can be from other research journals, articles, websites, and documents. All data will be collected according to the framework and will be filled in the grid table according to the QSOS method. This method, as well as the tool to implement it, such as evaluation sheet editor, generator of comparison, and choice grid, are under free license. The purpose is based on iterative process consists of 4 stages that is define, evaluate, select, and qualify. Another one is to measure PHP framework's performance, load, and stress test by using Apache JMeter. JMeter is a tool that can be used to measure and test application utilizing HTTP or FTP server. Apache JMeter may be used to test performance both on static and dynamic resource, web dynamic application. It can be used to stimulate a heavy load on a server, group of server, network, or object to test its strength or to analyze overall performance under different load type. To perform this performance test, RESTful API was developed for each framework. The same database used for the three frameworks. The API implement on PHP 7.4 and MySQL 5.7 version and execute on Microsoft Windows 10 operating system. For the purpose of conducting performance testing, each framework needs to have test case. Therefore, I use generated data as the case study. The data does not provide any meaning in this study except for the purpose of API testing only. Therefore, I decide to use generated data instead of actual data. The data is required to allow the API to send the request data through the endpoint API as a response. Therefore, I decide to use the generated data service from the library provided by Faker library. The library provides variety of data that can be directly generated and stored into MySQL database. Faker is released under the MIT license and can be used for free in this study. For this study, I prepared two test cases for performance testing. For test case 1, the data required is user data that has several features of user information, email, and password for the purpose of testing token-based authentication. The token generated are in accordance with the JWT format and will be sent in response for API requests. I generate 10 different datasets for test case 1. In addition, there are some other data that will be loaded into the database for the purpose of framework performance stress test for second test case. This data must be not less than 1000 datasets to allow accurate result to be obtained. For test case 2, the API sends the request to the API endpoint. Then the API will serve the request and prepare 1000 dataset as response. Both test cases for all three frameworks will use one database that consists of two tables. For experiment setup, I start with load the data using Faker library into my SQL database. Second, prepare the API for every framework. Third, prepare JMeter test plan for every framework. And fourth, ready to run the JMeter experiment. This is the setup for server name in testing machine for every framework. For Laravel, we use HTTP laravel.test followed by API endpoint. For Symfony, HTTP symfony.test followed by API endpoint. And Coordinator, HTTP coordinator.test followed by API endpoint. This naming used in JMeter as a host name and path. Let's see the result for our analysis and experiment for this study. Evaluation using QSOS method need to use past data. Therefore, to make the QSOS analysis, two main data sources are used. They are from journal or article, as well as data from the PHP framework website itself. The data obtained, collect, and categorize according to specific element to allow a clear comparison to be made. For every element will be given weightage score 0, 1, or 2. 0 is if the features is not covered, 1 if the feature is partially covered, and 2 if the feature is fully covered. From the result, we can see that Laravel scored 2 for all the elements except error handling and easy to understand. Symfony scored 2 for 5 elements, score 1 for 3 elements, and score 0 for 5 elements. Coordinator scored 2 for 5 elements, score 1 for 4 elements, and score 0 for 4 elements. For JMeter performance testing, the test plan for every testing is running separately. For every framework, there are two test cases. First test case is for testing token-based user authentication, and second test case is for performance testing based on 10 threads for 1000 dataset. From this table, we can see that all three frameworks success in first test case with response code 200. For load time, result, the smaller value the better. Coordinator only need 188 millisecond, Laravel 191 millisecond, and Symfony 235 millisecond. For performance testing, the lower the average value, the better. Coordinator score 177, followed by Laravel 185 and Symfony 203. For min and max result, the lower the value, the better. Coordinator score 135 and 168, followed by Laravel 143 and 204, and Symfony 197 and 225. For error, all three frameworks score 0. That means these three frameworks work well without any problem. For throughput, the higher the score, the better. Again, Coordinator have best score with 12.3 seconds, followed by Laravel 9.2 seconds and Symfony 6.2 seconds. For receive and send kilobyte per second, the lower the value, the better. Coordinator score 1593.01 for receive and 1.45 for send, followed by Laravel 2413.47 for receive and 1.20 for send, and Symfony 2733.58 for receive and 2.58 cents. For average part, the highest score the better. Coordinator score highest with 278,332.0, followed by Laravel 267,405.0 and Symfony 198,342.0. For J-meter experiment, Coordinator performed better compared to Laravel and Symfony. So, for the conclusion, QSOS analysis as a standard to make comparison for three frameworks. Laravel has an advantage over the other two frameworks. Laravel also has all the features needed to develop a good and best practice RESTful API. There are some features required by the RESTful API that are not available in Coordinator and also the Symfony framework. Next, performance testing using Apache JMeter as performance tools. Coordinator is seen to have advantage over the other two frameworks. However, Laravel has a slightly score difference compared to Coordinator. Symfony is still lagging behind in these experiments with the lower score for the entire testing. So, before I end my presentation, I would like to express my appreciation to Dr. Afizah Ismail, that is my research method lecturer, and also Dr. Ali Seman as my project supervisor. Thank you so much for the guide and knowledge for this semester. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you again and Assalamualaikum